This is Ryan Finkelstein, the host of Locked On Mets. On today's audio-only show, we're once again talking trade deadline. I'm going to go through what players the Mets could target that complement the all-stars on this roster to put this Mets team over the top. We're going to talk about guys like Josh Bell, Willson, Contreras, Brandon Drury when it comes to the offense. When it comes to the relief market, David Robertson, Michael Fulmer, and more. A lot to get to on this edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On Mets is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. On the show today, in honor of the All-Star Game, what I wanted to do is take a look at the Mets for All-Stars and find out which trade deadline acquisitions could complement the all-star talent on this roster the most. In the first segment, we'll go through the Mets all-stars and really some of the other top performers on the team and really figure out where the Mets could potentially add here. This is not about Juan Soto today, but we're going to go through that in the first segment. In the second segment, I'll go through some offensive upgrades that I think make sense for the Mets outside of, again, the big name that's out there. Then in the final segment, we'll talk about some bullpen arms that I think could complement closer Edwin Diaz, who, of course, was an all-star this season. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com. So the Mets had 4 all-stars, as we all know. Jeff McNeil, who got to start the game as a replacement for Jazz Chisholm, Pete Alonso, Starling Marte, who did not play, and then, of course, Edwin Diaz. And if you look at the Mets team, besides just those 4 all-stars, you have Francisco Lindor and Brandon Nimmo, who weren't in the game, but I think have played close to an all-star level. If you look at the position rankings when it comes to F4, which is Fangraphs wins above replacement, they are both top 3 at their position. Lindor is right there. Actually, I think Lindor is 4th if you include Tommy Edman as a shortstop, playing both short and second this year. You have Trey Turner and Dansby Swanson, and then Lindor is right there. You got Nimmo, who has the second highest F4 of any National League outfielder. The only outfielder who's been more valuable this year is Mookie Betts. So if you kind of loop those guys in there and you talk about the offense of this team, second base with Jeff McNeil, you're set. And if not him, Louis Guillorme is giving you great defense out there and is hitting over 290, getting on base at a great clip. So second base, the Mets are good. Right field with Starling Marte, we know they're good. He's an all-star, one of the best performers in the league this year. Center field, Brandon Nimmo, just mentioned him. You're set at that position. Shortstop, you're set at that position for the next decade with Lindor. First base, Pete Alonso. So no reason to add there. Here are the holes in the roster. We've talked about them all year, but let's go through it again. Eduardo Escobar at third base. It's a big hole. Right now this season, he's hitting is on base, is 279. That's not good. His WRC+, which we're going to talk about a lot today, measuring hitters based on a league average of 100, is 94. So 6% worse than a league average hitter. And honestly, I think if we talk about third base, it's a position the Mets could upgrade, but there's not a lot available. I don't know if he's going to be set in stone as your starter all year. I imagine out of the break he's going to be. At some point, though, when do the Mets just go all defense maybe and put Guillorme at third, or even Jeff McNeil at third and put Guillorme at second? Or when do they try to I don't even know. Do you force a Mark Vientos in there? As much as I have talked about in the past, I don't really necessarily believe in him defensively as a third baseman. You talk about outs above average. You want to know where Eduardo Escobar ranks this year at third base? In the 5th percentile. One of the worst defenders in the league based on that metric. So that's a clear area where the Mets could upgrade. Left field, I think the Mets are fine. Mark Canha has a 1.6 F4. That's 13th best among NL outfielders. His on-base percentage of .370 is very strong. His WRC plus of 124 is very strong, 24% better than your league average hitter. I don't think that's the biggest need that the Mets have to upgrade, but if Canada becomes a fourth outfielder for this team, you're pretty loaded. So I think that's still a place the Mets could put a bat if that's where they are able to make a deal. Now, you look at catcher and DH, right? Catcher, they're getting no offensive production right now, but I think you can swallow that because you're getting good defense. And the way the game is going, there's a lot of teams who don't have a good offensive catcher. You look at the Houston Astros, for years now, they've gotten by without any offensive production from that position. So I don't think that's a position the Mets have to upgrade, but as we're going to talk about Willson Contreras in the next segment, it's an area they could upgrade and get a lot better. Now, DH is the obvious one because if you're not going to get the production you want offensively from your catcher, if Louis Guillorme ends up in the lineup because he's the best offensive option for this team, better than an Eduardo Escobar, better than a JD Davis, whoever else you want to put out there in the infield, he's going to get on base for you, but there's not a lot of power there, and you're not necessarily going to get the greatest of power production from your other outfielders. You know, Canna, Nimmo, and Marte all get on base at a good clip and can hit for a high average, but not necessarily the power production. That's where you have to get so much more out of the DH than the Mets are getting this season, and that's why we continue to talk about and harp on it. That is the biggest position they got to upgrade at this deadline. It's also the easiest one because you don't have to worry about the defense. The Mets defensively are great this season. Find a bat. And also, you know, let's just say you were to get a good third baseman. Maybe Eduardo Escobar can figure something out this year, and Escobar could be the DH for you, at least fill the role that JD Davis is in right now, and obviously that would push JD Davis off the roster. You look at the other All-Star here, Edwin Diaz. I think we've talked about it ad nauseum, but the other relievers around him, while they've had pretty decent seasons, particularly Adam Ottavino, and even to a certain extent a Seth Lugo and a Drew Smith when you talk about their overall numbers, or even a Colin Holderman for that matter, none of them do you feel confident saving a game instead of Edwin Diaz? And so that's the other thing here. Can they get that closer? We talk about the starting rotation a lot here. I don't think it's an issue. And my point has been made on that. I don't know if I really have to go into it too much. Max Scherzer is obviously an all-star if he wasn't hurt this year. Taijuan Walker, you can make an argument that he had a better season up to this point than some of the other all-stars. Luis Castillo of the Reds is their lone representative. And if you look at their numbers head-to-head, Walker's been slightly better. So Taijuan could have been in the game. I think that even though the overall numbers for Chris Bassett and Carlos Carrasco haven't been great, if you go start by start by start, there is a reason why the Mets have won so many games, because those guys have a lot of quality outings where they're giving you 6, 7, sometimes even 8, where they are just dominant for you and really helping the team. They've had their blow-ups that have inflated their ERA, but they aren't a problem. David Peterson, I mean, man, we talk about the slider this year, how much better it is as a pitch. He's been one of the better left-handed starters in baseball. So I think that if you look at all those guys, I mean, right there, that's a solid rotation. You're going to get Jacob deGrom back. He is making a rehab, not a start, but they're going to have like a live BP against the minor league hitters on Wednesday. After that, we would know if he could get off of the IL right on the other side of this break, and that's obviously going to just vault your rotation to a whole nother stratosphere. So rotation's not an issue. The issues I look at right now for this Mets team that they could address at the deadline: DH, bullpen. We've talked about those for sure on this show a bunch lately, but also I think if they were able to find a starting third baseman, that really could be another big boost to this team. And catcher is another position where if you can get a Willson Contreras to be your starter, it's just going to take this Mets team to a whole different level. But I'm going to talk about which players kind of fit those molds in just a minute. First, though, whether you're ready to pop the question or if you're celebrating a milestone moment, find jewelry as unique as her with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. There you can build the engagement ring of your dreams, because Blue Nile has simple online tools that let you choose the diamond shape, size, and clarity, as well as the setting style. Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft her perfect engagement ring. Each ring is one of a kind, so you can celebrate life's special moments with fine jewelry, as Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Mets listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement, so use the code Locked On. Again, that's code Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever peace by going to BlueNile.com today. So I was scanning the market for third baseman that could potentially replace Eduardo Escobar, and there's one name that stands out above all the rest. It's a very interesting one because he played on the Mets last year and he was pretty good. Brandon Drury. He's actually the only third baseman in all of baseball right now that's in the top 10 in F4 and WRC+ who could be had in a trade. So that's how good this guy's been in Cincinnati. Now, granted, it's Great American Ballpark. He's playing in a bandbox. He's playing on a team where the games don't matter, in a division where it's a lot of bandboxes. If you're talking about Wrigley, if you're talking about Milwaukee, obviously there's some good pitching in that division if we're talking about the Brewers and some of the starters on the Cardinals, but you also get a face-off against the Cubs and the Pirates where the pitching is not great. So you have to take some of his numbers with a grain of salt, but even with that, his WRC+ on the road this year is 115. So still 15% better than your league average hitter and about 20% better than Eduardo Escobar. Now, if you put all the numbers together, the home and the road, he's hitting 278, 336 on base, 528 slugging, 18 home runs for Brandon Drury. That is pop the Mets could desperately use in this lineup. His WRC+ is 134. Now here is where Drury gets a little bit more exciting for the Mets. He mashes against left-handed pitching. That was his role last year for the Mets, you may remember. That guy that, this was before the DH, would come in as a pinch hitter against a lefty in a big spot. And he also came through in some big spots last year. Against lefties this season, he's hitting 325, 345 on base, 687 slugging, a 177 WRC+, 77% better than your league average hitter. He could play third base, he could play second base. He'll play a better third base than Eduardo Escobar as well. This is a guy that you can acquire pretty cheap. Okay, this is a player that's on a one-year deal for a rebuilding Reds team. He's absolutely going to be moved. It'll take one prospect, honestly, maybe two. You just have to give the best offer to the Reds for what's out there, and I don't think that's going to cost too much. I don't even know if you have to give up a top 10 prospect to get him. Maybe we're talking Dominic Hamlin, who's had a good year as a pitching prospect that I like, but if you're getting a player for a playoff push, maybe that's all you have to give up, and then, maybe a lottery ticket thrown in. Not a lot here. And also, I could see a scenario where you have to give up one prospect, and you include J.D. Davis in this trade, and if you're the Reds, you're like, all right, well, J.D. Davis, we got some extra control there. We can try to turn J.D. Davis into Brandon Drury next year. And he might just be that for them. But for the Mets, you get a much better plug-and-play guy right now who could be your starting third baseman, can supplant Eduardo Escobar, can start every single time you face a lefty. You could throw him in left field in a pinch if you wanted to, can play second base. It makes a ton of sense, particularly when we're talking about cost of acquisition. I actually love the idea of getting Brandon Drury. Let's just say, and we're not doing a Juan Soto podcast today, but let's just say the Mets pull off that trade. They could very easily add in a Drury as well as a complement to a trade like that. Or if they were to get a Josh Bell or a Willson Contreras, Drury is a guy that can be had for a reasonable cost that I think really helps this Mets team. Like I said, if you can replace J.D. Davis with Brandon Drury tomorrow, that's a massive win for this team. Now, you look at some other options, and of that same ilk, Wilmer Flores is an option here. The Giants are kind of caught in between. Would they consider dealing Flores? Because honestly, I don't think that he's the biggest part of their future. Maybe. You look at his numbers. He has 13 home runs, 253 hitter, 335 on base, .445 slugging, a 122 WRC plus, 22% better than your league average hitter. One of the reasons why I'm so against J.D. Davis, honestly, if you really want to go all the way back in the timeline here, is because in 2019, the Mets non-tender Flores to trade for J.D. Davis, and I said at the time it made no sense because I thought Flores was a really nice piece, and the Wilpons were just sick of him. They got sick of players way too soon. Flores has proven since he's left, he's a quality, utility infielder off your bench that can start in a pinch and be good for you. He's a really quality major leaguer. Never going to be an all-star. Maybe didn't ascend to the type of status you thought when he was a top prospect, but a really good ball player that's had a really nice career, and it would be awesome to get Flo back for a playoff push. I would absolutely love that. Imagine how the fans would feel. Imagine what it would be like when he stepped into the box with the Friends theme song again. Just for the vibes alone, I love the idea of Wilmer Flores coming back. And also, speaking of the Giants, another option I think would cost a little bit more than Wilmer Flores for sure in a trade would be Jock Peterson. Here's a guy that's hitting .252, .331 on base. So you go with those two things, not much better than Flo, but he has the 17 home runs, which gives him a .517 slugging percentage that is better than you're getting at Wilmer Flores with the .445 slugging. And you look at the WRC plus of 135, 13% better than Flores, although a lot of that came from destroying the Mets in that one series. I don't know if that's necessarily the best option, but it is one to mention here. And obviously defensively he's not that great, but he would probably be a DH for the Mets. A couple of the guys to talk about. You got some first base / DH options that I don't know if they can be had, but they're interesting. In Christian Walker for the Diamondbacks, who has 22 home runs this season, but a .204 hitter, .319 on base, 115 WRC plus, 2 years left of control. I think the cost is going to be too much to acquire him, and I don't know how he would fit on this Mets team, but it was a name I thought I should mention. CJ Cron's another. He's also under control past this season, playing for the Rockies. They're kind of caught in between another guy where I'm not quite sure, what it's going to take to acquire him, and I don't know if the juice is really worth the squeeze. He is better than Walker, 21 home runs, .350 on base percentage, 135 WRC plus, but also has stats that are super inflated due to playing in Coors Field. Beyond that, we get to the real top-tier trade targets the Mets could look at if they aren't getting the guy that we're trying not to spend another show talking about in Juan Soto, and that's his teammate in one with Josh Bell. 13 home runs this season, but he's hitting .311, .390 on base, .504 slugging, 148 WRC plus, 48% better than your league average hitter. He's walking at a 10.7% clip, and he's only striking out at a 13.5% clip. A great bat, a switch hitter. You slot him in the lineup right behind Pete Alonso. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Mets. His F4 of 2.7 is really strong. Here's the one thing that concerns me, though, about Josh Bell. Or maybe there's two things. The first one is he usually only plays one good half of the season. 2019, he had a 167 OPS plus in the first half. OPS plus, very similar stat to WRC plus. Measuring hitters based on a league average of 100. So, first half, great. I believe he was an all-star. Second half, 107. Still above average, but just slightly above average. Last year, 109 OPS plus in the first half. Second half, 140. So, I look at what he did in this first half, and I just don't know if it's going to be sustainable in the second half. You're talking about moving him in the middle of the season into a pennant race, into a market he's never played in. He's played in Pittsburgh and Washington primarily here. Not the biggest type of markets that really could prepare him for coming to New York. I don't love the idea of Josh Bell, even though I know a lot of people do. And the reason I don't love it is because, again, I mentioned, each half of the season, can he actually put it together for a full year? But also, I don't know, there's something about it that just tells me that he wouldn't adjust properly. It might be like when you got Jay Bruce in 2016. And the cost of acquisition, I think, is going to be really high. I think the Nationals have him right now slated probably as the best bat available on the market other than the big name in Juan Soto. And so with that, I think they're going to try to get two top-tier prospects for him, or at least one really good prospect. And do you want to trade a Ronnie Mauricio for a Josh Bell rental? I don't know if it costs quite that much, but I certainly don't want to. So I think just the cost of acquisition to me is too much for a Josh Bell. But if they were able to get him, and I didn't hate the prospect package they gave up, he certainly makes a lot of sense to be the DH for the remainder of the season. We close things out with Willson Contreras, and as I mentioned on Monday's show, to me, this is still the trade that makes the most sense. You get Willson Contreras, you get David Robertson, you're ready to go. Let's just say the Mets come out of this deadline with Willson Contreras, David Robertson, and Brandon Drury. You now have a third baseman, you got a catcher. Suddenly, you look at the lineup top to bottom, and let's just say it's Nimmo, Marte, Lindor, Alonso, McNeil, Contreras, Drury. Who am I missing here? Guillorme maybe, and a catcher. That's a good lineup. That's a really good lineup. But I guess in that sense, Drury might be the DH for the Mets. But the catcher would be Contreras. So here I am screwing that one up, botching it. But regardless, the point is, if you were to get Drury and Contreras, you would have two guys that matched against left-handed pitching that would really help the Mets lineup in those days. And I think both of them would fill positions of need very well. Drury as a defensive third baseman, Contreras having anything offensively from the catcher position. And you look at the numbers on Contreras, I think we have talked about them in the past, but a .253 hitter this year, 366 on base, 455 slugging, a 133 WRC plus. He's hit 13 home runs. You can make an argument he's been maybe the best offensive catcher in the National League this year. You look at what he does against lefties. 284 hitter this season, 391 on base, 676 slugging. 7 of those 13 home runs have come in his 74 at-bats against lefties. His OPS is over 1,000. His WRC plus against lefties is 191. He might become arguably your best hitter against left-handed pitching if you were to acquire him. So those are the pieces I really like. If we were to kind of power rank it out, it's Willson Contreras, it's Brandon Drury, it's Josh Bell, and then Flores for the vibes. Those are the guys I really like at this year's deadline offensively, outside of course, the huge all-in move that we've been talking about for the last few days. But there's also the bullpen to address, so I want to go through some names that make sense there. First, though, BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, as BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So as I've mentioned before, I am the managing editor for JustBaseball.com, and I gotta say, if you're looking for good deadline coverage, we got you. We've been doing trade deadline outlooks, going through each team. Obviously, I wrote one on the Mets, but every single team in baseball, we will have a trade deadline outlook going through which teams are buyers, which teams are sellers, what the buyers are looking for, what the sellers have to sell. We talk also about the teams that are in the middle. Do they want to buy here, or here are the pieces they could sell if they want to go in that direction? It really is a comprehensive place to find all of your deadline coverage. And we also have articles like our top 20 impact pieces that could be had at the deadline. And we had a great one that went up from one of our new writers, Max Cutler, also a Mets fan. So I want to give him a shout out. Top impact relievers available at the deadline. He goes through a lot of guys that can really help teams. And the first one is another guy that Mets fans should be familiar with. He was traded at a deadline in 2015 to get a player of some pretty, substance there. A guy that really helped the Mets that season, in Yoenis Cespedes. This was the headlining piece that went out. He went on to win the Rookie of the Year in the American League, and that is Michael Fulmer. Now, at the time when he won the Rookie of the Year, he was a starter. Now, he has been converted into one of the best relief pitchers in baseball. In 90 1/3 innings as a reliever, dating back to last season, he has a 2.29 ERA. This year, a 1.89 ERA. And these stats, all of them from this article, were pulled, I believe, through play on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe Thursday. But you look still, and this is obviously Thursday of last week. His strikeout per 9, almost 10. And that's after only striking out just under 7 batters per 9 as a starter. And what Max points out here, that This is no fluke that he's striking out more batters because he's missing barrels more than almost anyone. He's in the 99th percentile in barrel percentage against, and it really comes down to the slider, using it over 60% of the time this year after using it less than 25% of the time as a starter. That's what relievers do. They hone in on their best pitch, they throw it all the time, and it's tough to hit. His slider is going over 90 miles per hour on average, which is a lot more than your league average slider. And you look at run value. I talked about run value when I was breaking down Taijuan Walker a couple weeks ago. Run value is a stat that basically, to really boil it down, it tells you how effective a pitch is, and it really does come into account of the situation you throw it. Because let's just say you have a bases loaded spot where you need to get a strikeout with one out, and you get that strikeout on the slider. Well, now there's 2 outs, and your chances of preventing a run go significantly up, and so you can save, I think the exact math of that is about 0.7 runs based on that strikeout for that pitch, and that's how they kind of figure out that stat. I know it's confusing, but the bottom line here is this year, the run value on his slider is minus 11. So it's like he's taken 11 runs off the board by having that weapon, and only 2 sliders in baseball have been more effective than Michael Fulmer. So this is a really good option for the Mets. You can get him without giving up too much. It's a rebuilding team in Detroit. You're talking about acquiring a reliever. I love the idea of getting Michael Fulmer back. Let's just flash back to 2015. Bring Fulmer back. Bring Flo back. This could be a way that you could kind of come full circle here. Now, another option is Daniel Bard. He has been the closer in Colorado. He has 18 saves. Released again, this was as of July 15th. And you look at what he does, a 2-pitch pitcher. This sinker has been his bread and butter, throwing it 51.6% of the time, way up from last year at 14.6. Hitters are batting 167 against his sinker because they hit that pitch right into the ground. The average launch angle of minus 14 explains that. That just means straight down are they going with that sinker. He also has a slider that's been a really good pitch for him, getting whiffs 35.2% of the time, as well as getting pop-ups on it. The average exit velocity for Bard against him, he's in the 88th percentile, so guys are not hitting the ball hard against him. He has a 2.08 ERA. That's a really good option for the Mets that, again, I don't think it's going to cost too much. You're talking about a very old reliever at this point who's just kind of hit a fountain of the youth at the end of his career here. Acquire him. He could be another closer option. I like Daniel Bard a lot. And if he's having this much success in Colorado, imagine he goes to a more pitcher-friendly ballpark. David Bednar is an option that I don't want to spend too much time on because I think if you're going to give up the prospect capital that it'll take to acquire a Bednar, you might as well get a Willson Contreras. Like it's great because you got 4 years of control after this for Bednar, but it's not often that trading for a reliever with a bunch of control works out. We're seeing with Edwin Diaz, that's maybe the exception to the rule, but eventually they get expensive, and in my opinion, you're better off buying rentals when it comes to relievers because the cost won't be as much, and just the turnover. You just don't know what Bednar is going to be in 2 years. He is a pretty safe bet to continue to be strong, and he's a good multi-inning reliever. He's obviously the best reliever that could be on the market here, but I just don't know if I love the idea of trading a Ronnie Mauricio, a Mark Vientos, one of those types of prospects, even Alex Ramirez, even going down like a Calvin Ziegler, and it would take more than just one of those type of guys to get him. To me, it's just the cost is too much. So we'll see if the Mets get Bednar. Look, if they do, and we're just talking about what helps them win this year, I mean, best reliever they can get. I just don't think that is the most realistic of options. So we go to some other guys that I think make sense. David Robertson has been closing in Chicago. Again, I've talked about him a bunch. Having him and Contreras in the same trade makes a lot of sense. ERA, close to 2 here, 2.10. This was as of July 15th with a strikeout rate over 30%. Really like him as an option for the Mets. Andrew Chafin's another one of the Mets to sign him this offseason. He has a 2.30 ERA. Lefties are batting less than 200 against him. So that could be kind of your replacement for Joely Rodriguez. And obviously Chasen Shreve is filling that role for the Mets as well this year before they decided to DFA and just outright release him. You get Chafin in there. You can maybe do the same thing with Joely. Just kind of depends on how your bullpen shakes out. But I like Chafin as an option. Let's just say maybe you get Chafin and Fulmer in the same deal from the Tigers. That would be nice. I mean, that could really take your bullpen to a whole different level. So I really like that as an option. Scott Efros, another guy from the Cubs, 96th percentile in chase rate, has a kind of a funky delivery. He's an option here. He's a guy that has really good expected metrics. I'd like him as well, but if they were really to get one of the relievers, I like Robertson as the closer, as the experience he has in New York when he was with the Yankees. That just makes sense to me. So to boil down the relief options one last time, to me, Michael Fulmer, David Robertson are really the two that I like the most, but Daniel Bard, a very close third. When it comes to lefties, Andrew Chafin makes a lot of sense. Joe Mantiply is another with the Diamondbacks that I really like as well. A ton of control left for Mantiply, so I don't know what the cost of acquisition would be, but he is a guy that has broken through in his 30s in a way that I don't think anyone could have expected. It could just be a one-year wonder type deal here with Mantiply, and so with that, I don't think the cost would be too crazy, but we'll see what the Diamondbacks are asking for. They can ask for the world and know that, hey, they have a quality reliever for the next couple of years beyond this anyway. No need to definitely trade him. Whereas if you're talking about more of the rental options, I think you can probably acquire them a little bit easier than even a Mantiply. So those are the names that I like. If we were to just talk about the Mets deadline, if they were to not get Juan Soto and they were to come out of this with Brandon Drury, with Willson Contreras and David Robertson, that's a good deadline. If they came out with Drury, Michael Fulmer, and Andrew Chafin, so they really address the bullpen, and Drury is a nice piece for them, and then you call up a Mark Vientos, and who knows, maybe even you just go all youth this year, and instead of trading Vientos and Alvarez to get a Juan Soto, you trust these guys in a pennant race. That's an option for this team as well. I think they have a ton of options. They got to be aggressive. They have to make additions, but they don't have to get super crazy. If they can win in the margins here, they can have a really successful second half, and they can be a team that's really, really dangerous in the postseason. Anyway, that's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. I'll be talking to Jordan Grossman tomorrow. We'll be recapping the MLB draft. Not sure if that'll be released on Thursday or Friday. Could be a 2-part episode depending on how long we go. Also coming up this week, a series preview of the first series out of the break against the Padres. And maybe, of course, a little bit more deadline talk, depending on if there's any more news that breaks. But as always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, @Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show, @Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Prospects. I just mentioned the draft. Lindsey Crosby has you covered. He's our prospect encyclopedia. I'm sure he's done a lot of draft stuff, so make sure you check him out. You can find Locked On MLB Prospects wherever you get podcasts.